Hi, my name is Sasan. This is Proteus Debate Academy. I made like a little slide. Actually, I reused most of this from another video. But I found this and I was like, oh, great. I don't have to spend as much time explaining who I am and what we do. I wanted to talk. I made a video asking people what types of things they wanted us to talk about. And a lot of it was, things about like building teams and being effective at different levels. And I want to make videos soon talking about all that stuff. But I think um, there's a lot that I want to say about debate that I think a lot of debaters and debate coaches don't think enough about. And I think that is the biggest through line in what I see as people doing debate pedagogy ineffectively. With the debate pedagogy, I mean, the learning and teaching of debate. And that is that they don't treat debate like a strategy game. They don't try to learn it like a strategy game. They don't try to improve at it like a strategy game. I think the reason for that is because debate usually exists in academic settings like high schools. And you're used to one specific model of teaching because you're used to classes not being zero sum, right? Like, in other words, everybody in a class can get an A in theory. Everybody in a class can get an F in theory. Debate doesn't work that way, right? Debate is a competitive activity and it's zero sum. Like, winning a game means your opponent lost. Losing means your opponent won. That means there's no such thing as a good argument, right? Without context, because there isn't some sort of standard by which we can say this earns you an A. You can do terribly in a debate and win. You could do really, really well in a debate and lose, right? So there's aspects of strategic thinking that there's implications of debate being a strategy game that I want to talk about because I think it points out how people misprioritize the way they're learning and teaching debate. Is this the first one? No, I guess I haven't memorized exactly what slides go in what order. But what do I mean by a game of strategy, right? So just real quick, this isn't like a strict rule, right? Like games will have elements of strategy and skill and chance in some sort of mix. I think I talked more about this in my game design video, but here's some games of chance: roulette, bingo, rock, paper, scissors. The rock, paper, scissors, people claim to have strategy at it and claim to be really good at it, but sure, whatever. Asterisk on that one. Games of skill, again, like tug of war does involve some strategy. There are strategies in tug of war which are like banned. But generally speaking, similarly, like bodybuilding, one of the required watchings. I had this video on movies that I show my debaters, and one of the rules for competing on my college debate team was everybody had to watch the movie Pumping Iron, which is about bodybuilders doing bodybuilding competitions, but it's wild how much psychology and like day of stuff like affects the results, where you would just think like you built the body over the course of years. Like, how much could the day before the competition really affect the results? But what I want to focus on is like games of strategy in the way that, let's say, chess is a game of strategy. In other words, the winner of a chess game is not determined by who was the luckiest, usually, and is not determined by a, let's say, physical skill, usually, right? There's bullet chess where, yes, like being able to move things and maybe even you would call like processing things a skill. Sure, there's exceptions, but generally speaking, chess is a strategy game. And the way, one like litmus test I would use is a game of strategy is one in which where if the same game was played again and one side had to repeat the exact same actions anytime possible, the non-repeating side would have a significant advantage. In other words, right? Let's say I'm debating a student. This is a practice that I've done with my students, and actually, I'm teaching online classes in the fall where we do this. Right? There's no set curriculum; it's for like more advanced debaters, and on day one, there is a debate. I come in, I'm the AF, I read an AF case. And the negative reads whatever answers they want. They have some amount of time to prepare. And then we have that debate. And in most of the instances where I'm debating students who are novice, like I'm not trying to make this sound like a brag, I usually win. But the real exercise is okay, next time we do a debate in a week from now, I will be reading the exact same AF case. And you now have 1 week to change your strategy, change your arguments, change what you're going to do. And I might change how I respond to your new actions, but I'm going to read the exact same AF case. And you get to try another at bat, and maybe you still lose again, right? But I think it's a really effective way of people getting to sort of understand the strategy that's baked into a good debate case. Because most debate cases that I look at aren't written with any real strategy in mind. It's just a pile of evidence, and then they use certain debate skills that they've used, that they've practiced, like speaking clearly and enunciating well and maybe talking fast to try to get through that evidence as fast as possible. But there isn't a lot of strategic thinking going on. So anyway, let's talk about the implications, right? I talked about how there's 3 major implications that I want to talk about for debate being a strategy game. And the first implication is, this is like something that I'm going to reference later. Great. Implication. Most debate advice is bad. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me show you like advice that isn't bad for comparison. This is a infographic on how to throw a football. This is something I think about a lot, right? I think about like Little League and like Pee-wee soccer, football, and whatever. And a lot of athletes start playing games pretty young, and then they get better, and they go to high school and they join their varsity team, and they're much better at playing the game. Maybe they even go pro, right? But most of the time, they don't have to unlearn what their coaches taught them, because this is how you throw a football. Now, there might be a little bit more nuance to it in the NFL, but most of it is in things like timing and, I don't know, balance and release points and things like that, right? But like, what part of the football you grip and where you put your fingers, like, there isn't a lot of bad information floating around on this. And it doesn't matter if your football coach didn't play in the NFL. They're not going to like teach you to like fling the football end over end. But in strategy games, it's a little bit different, right? So, right. I think if we're talking about like, you have a strategy, you're going to use it, right? You need the knowledge of what the strategies are. You need the processing to know when to use which strategy. This is that thing happening. I've identified this. I can process everything fast enough. And then there's the like more skill-based stuff of executing it, right? Now we'll put like throwing a football and like properly. Sure, there's strategy. I mean, it's better than trying to throw it like a frisbee. I'd call that strategy, but it's mostly in the execution that like determines how well a football is thrown. Is this the slide that I want? This is the slide that I want. So this is called a normal distribution for those of you who have not taken a statistics class. And This describes anything that has an equal number of people above average and an equal number of people below average, which, because of the definition of average, is usually the case, right? Most random things fall into here. So, for example, this could be height. Most men are in America 5'10", and so we can imagine that line in the middle to be 5'10". And let's say the line on the left is 5'7", the line on the right is, I don't know, 6'2", and what that would mean is that 68% of men are somewhere between 5'7" and 6'2", right? And the farther you move away from average, the fewer people who are in that area. And you'll know that, you know, there's 68% in the middle, but there's also the 13.5 and the 2.35 that's below that. So, like, once you get above average, right? Like, let's say you get into, do I have my mouse right now? Yeah, you get into this range, right? Once you get into this range, you are better than like 80% of people, right? Well, let's imagine a game where doing well is entirely decided by strategy. I know that that is not 100% the case with debate, but I would say that is at least 80% the case with debate. I think having a really good understanding of debate strategy and being able to process and execute on that, like, knowledge of debate strategy is 80% at least of what determines a winner. So what that means also, right, is that most people, by definition, are somewhere in the middle over here. And if they understood how to play the game of debate well, they wouldn't be here. They would be over on the right. And so what that means is that most advice is from average debaters, right? The average debater is going to give you average debate advice. And while that's fine for how to swing a baseball, it's not great for debate because there's a lot more nuance to it, and the outcome is much more directly influenced by your actual knowledge of the game. Now, I would say it's more similar, right, to chess. So here's chess, where it's like on the left, right, where if you understood chess as well as a grandmaster, then you would probably be a grandmaster, right? Maybe there is some processing uh, skills involved, right, for lack of a better word. But it's not a lot of execution, right? If you actually understood chess as well as a grandmaster, you would probably be a grandmaster or close to it. You wouldn't have an elo of like 1,000 like me. There are some exceptions, interestingly, in chess, which I think are useful to look at because I think it points to like what could debate one day look like. So this opening is the most popular opening in chess, maybe, I think. It's called the Roy Lopez. And the thing is that this is an opening that a lot of chess players are taught very early on. Now, a lot of people are just taught how to move the pieces. They don't have any sense of strategy at all when they're moving their pieces. They just understand how they move, and if they see a piece they can grab, they grab it. But very early on in chess lessons, you get taught this opening. And the thing with this opening is that it's viable even for grandmasters. Grandmasters all the time use this opening. So why is it that in the strategy game of chess, proper strategy has made its way down to beginners, but in the game of debate, it doesn't, right? Well, most novices have really bad strategy, and frankly, they're trained wrong, not just by their coaches, but by the advice they get from other people, by I don't know, videos they see online, maybe, I don't know, the things that they talk about with their friends, things that they learn by winning a debate round and that being reinforced as correct in their brain, right? Because it worked in one novice round once. So why is chess different? Why is the quality of instruction higher? Well, you might think it's because chess is older, but that's not really it, because organized debate is probably around as old as chess, if not older, right? So if that's not it, what is it? Well, chess has really good institutional memory. What do I mean by that? There are more books written about the game of chess than there are books on every other sport combined. Not only that, but pretty much every chess game of note ever, like every competitive chess game for the last several hundred years, has been recorded and is in databases that are very easy for anyone to access. And the game is really easy to notate. You can notate a game of chess, I don't know, 20 moves. You have 2 to 3 letters describing each move, so it wasn't like 80 characters. But you can't really do that in debate. There's an interesting textbook, I guess, on the history of policy debate that includes transcripts of like 3 debates, and it's like 80 pages. And also, people make a living off of teaching chess. And not a lot of people make a living with debate. And the best, like, doing well in chess usually means that you're going to stay in the chess world. Doing really well in high school debate usually means you're going to go do something else, right? Which is good, right? But it means that a lot of the best debaters, they might coach for a few years, but usually they're moving on and doing something else, and that institutional memory like leaves. We don't have great like debate books. We don't have great like repositories of like debate instruction, and that makes it really hard to learn it right. One of the hardest things for me coaching at the college was coaching students that had high school experience because they'd learned it wrong. When I was a kid, I really liked this anime called Rurouni Kenshin, and I wanted to take kendo classes, like Japanese sword fighting. And my parents drove me to a kendo place. We didn't end up taking the lessons. But there was this moment where they were talking to the, I guess, sensei, and they were like, so what kind of stuff does he need to be doing at home if we do this? And the guy said, he shouldn't do anything at home. When he's practicing here, I can watch him and I can see when he's making a mistake and I can fix it. If he practices at home, he's going to do it wrong 100 times, and that's going to just be built in. And I think unlearning things is a lot harder than learning things. At the college, I'd say within 2 years, really within 1 year, right? Year and a half. But within 2 years, I would put the average DVC debater, not average, let's say, I don't know. I would put the top 4 DVC debaters with 2 years of experience at any given time against any high school debater in the country. I'm not super worried about their odds. But that's just because, like, learning things properly is a lot faster than learning things improperly and then having to reconfigure your entire understanding of that thing. Do I have another implication here? Yeah, okay, cool. The second implication of debate being a strategy game is that topical evidence isn't that important. And this is something that every like beginning debater that I teach will ask me about a lot, especially in like high school, is they'll be like, well, can you help me research this topic? Can you help me with whatever? Like, I don't know anything about the Supreme Court. And the fact of the matter is that debate strategy makes knowing a lot about the topic not very important. Why is that? Take a look at this block and imagine that this is a piece of flow paper, right? Which side is winning? Now, this is an abstraction. You can't tell what they're saying, right? You just imagine that there's a block of text in blue ink or, red ink or whatever. But just looking at that shape, which side is winning? I think anyone that knows anything about flowing knows that the blue side is winning, probably the AF, right? There's one conceded argument from the neg, that's the one over here, but that doesn't get extended over here. And so it isn't something the judge is considering. Even if it was, knowing a little bit more about debate, you would know that at the top is probably something like uniqueness, and at the bottom is probably something like impacts. So you having some response to one of the uniqueness arguments isn't, especially when you don't extend it, isn't going to take out this argument. And whatever is at the bottom here, these are impacts, and they're conceded impacts. And so that's probably an argument that is winning. See, like, concessions play a really important factor in the strategy of debate. We have this idea that if you don't respond to an argument, it is the same as agreeing to it, which means that whether the evidence is good or not is a secondary question to whether it is conceded or not, right? Because if it's conceded, then it's automatically true. So you first have to ask yourself as a judge, was this responded to? Then you have to ask yourself, okay, what was the quality of that response, right? And that leads to other implications. Like, for example, off the top of your head, can you tell me right now, what is the argument in the debate, let's say an LD round, that is the most likely to get dropped? Now, you might be thinking, how would I possibly know what a team is, like a debater is going to drop? But if you have a little bit more experience, or you just think about it, it's the affirmative's last contention, right? Why? Well, because the negative side has to read all of their arguments and respond to the opponent's argument in the same speech. They are probably going to read their arguments first, and so they're going to start with their arguments, then start responding to the AF, go through the AF in order, and if they run out of time, the piece that they're going to drop is the last AF argument, which means if you have one really big impact that would win you the whole debate, if it's completely dropped and you're the affirmative, where should you put that impact? Probably as the last impact on your last contention, right? This is just a basic element of strategy that circumvents any content in the debate, because whatever that argument that got dropped now has to be treated as true. You could look at this now and be like, who's winning? Well, it depends, right? Both of these arguments are at the impact level, probably. This is like playing cards. Is a flowing exercise you do where you read out playing cards and people have to, so that's 4 of hearts, 7 of hearts. Now, 4 of hearts could be a really good argument. The 7 of hearts could be a really good argument. And if I'm looking at a flow that looks like this, I'm now going to be like, okay, what are these impacts and how do they compare with each other? But even then, just topical content isn't the most important factor. Why? Well, coaches talk all the time about terminal impact, impacts, right? What does that mean? I think people have a really hard time like defining terms in debate. They can kind of tell you how it's used, but they can't just be like, this is what a terminal impact is. Well, here's what a terminal impact is, right? A terminal impact is an impact that is good enough to win a debate. And usually there's a finite number, right? This is a pretty good list. And so what I mean by all of this is, let's say you can show X happens, right? Just some impact happens as a result of some action. If the impact is one of these 7 and your opponent's impacts are not one of these 7, then you are probably going to outweigh. In other words, all the weighing skills that you're like learning and talking about in debate, they will help you weigh these impacts against each other. But if we're talking about like nuclear war versus like, I don't know, like voters have more say, like it's not even close, right? So the idea is that if you can reach these impacts, you are much more likely to win the debate against somebody who doesn't reach one of these impacts. This isn't a comprehensive list. This is just, So what does that look like? This is, really important stuff about impacts. Okay. These will apply to most topics. Not every one of these will apply to every topic, but 1 or 2 of these will apply to pretty much any topic. And topics that don't have any link to these terminal impacts don't tend to get chosen or don't tend to get suggestions. It's not impossible for us to debate things that don't involve these, but they just tend not to be chosen. And like the really important thing about this is why poverty is bad doesn't change whether you're talking about healthcare causing poverty or a financial crisis causing poverty. Like what poverty is and the effect it has is still the same, right? Why a global pandemic is dangerous doesn't change whether we're talking about one topic or another topic. That means that you can use the same evidence over and over and over again. That's why some teams have impact cards in their files that go back like 20 years, right? And this is really important in stuff like Parley, because in Parley, the topic changes every single round and you only have 20 minutes to prepare. So what great Parley debaters do is they write out ahead of time impact blocks, like 3 pieces of evidence explaining exactly what environmental collapse looks like and why it's really important. And then you just memorize that. So you use that anytime you want that to come up, and it applies in so many different debates. And all you really need as far as the topic goes is the connection from point A to B, from the resolution to how we get to this impact. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So this is advantage structure. If you aren't familiar with it, we have a whole video on it. But this is the basic explanation of what the 4 parts of a proper debate argument look like. There's some problem in a policy round, not in like a value resolution, but there's some problem right now. This is also assuming you're the AF. Great. There's some problem right now. The resolution asks us to do something. So that we do this thing. There's a problem. We do something. Here's how we address that problem through doing that action, and here's the impact that has, why that's important. And there's that arrow going from left to right because this is how the argument is read, right? You start on the left, you move over to the right. Or I guess you start at the top and move down because you're usually flowing vertically. But here is, let's take a look at like the actual evidence involved, right? When you're talking about what the status quo looks like, that doesn't need to have anything specific to do with your topic, right? And your link, the action that we're taking, that doesn't need any evidence at all, because that's just the resolution says to imagine we're doing that. You do need some topical evidence for where we talk about like how that action has an effect on what we're talking about, right? On changes the uniqueness, changes the status quo. You need some topical evidence there, but then you get to the impact, and now you're reading generic evidence again. So topical evidence only makes up 1/4 of the argument. And if you count like having multiple uniqueness points, multiple impact points, less than that, right? So let's talk about what this looks like in practice. What you can do is you can make what we call generic arguments. Now I have a little note at the bottom. Generic doesn't mean common, right? It doesn't mean, oh, these are arguments people make all the time. People might make these arguments all the time, but that's not what makes them generic. What makes them generic is that they are shells that fit a wide variety of resolutions. So let's take a look at this one. This is a real one that I have had students run many times, and I didn't even come up with it. Shout out to, I don't know if Kevin came up with it, but shout out to Kevin Ozamaro. That was the first time I heard about super tuberculosis. Great. So the uniqueness is you have evidence that says prisons are overpopulated right now, which they are, and we're on the brink of a global health crisis as a result of it, which we are. There are basically tuberculosis in prisons because of the terrible conditions there, and because a lot of people who get sent to prison, they like have tuberculosis medication, but they don't get like consistent access to it, so they take some of their pills, so it becomes like drug resistant, and it goes around, whatever, right? The point is, the tuberculosis strains become multi-drug resistant, which makes it really, really difficult to treat. Tuberculosis, it turns out, which you'll talk more about in the impacts, is like more humans have died of tuberculosis than any other disease in human history, I think. Maybe it's any other virus, I don't know. And right now, it is curable. And in many parts of the world, it isn't cured. Many, many people, it's still, I think, the number 2 most killing virus in the world after, I think, like COVID right now. But, yeah, but if it crosses the brink, right, it could become fully drug resistant, in which case we would be back to, like, the Middle Ages level of tuberculosis, but way worse, because we're way more densely populated. We have travel from every continent to every continent. Like, if you look at how fast the Black Plague spread, it took like a year to get from Germany to Norway, right? But COVID was everywhere in the world within, days. So super tuberculosis would be very deadly. Now, the link here is any resolution that you can show increases prison population. So let's take a look at what that might be. Banning assault rifles. Okay, so how might banning assault rifles increase prison population? Well, if you could show that not everyone would comply, and ask maybe in cross-examination, right? If you're the neg, hey, I guess in this case we're talking about a DA, a disadvantage, a negative contention. But whatever, if you ask your opponent, like, hey, what do we do with people who don't give up their assault rifles, and they're like, they go to jail, then there you go. You don't even need evidence. They just said it. But let's say you just Google it. Like, would people be sent to prison? You just need some evidence, right? That just, it has some level of that. And this impact scenario is so bad, especially if it doesn't get answered well, which a lot of people aren't ready to answer it because they were ready to talk about assault rifles. They don't know anything about tuberculosis, right? They didn't know that they were supposed to prepare for this. And so now it works really well. You'll notice that the arrow on this slide is going the other way. One of the first videos we made on this channel, we had a thing called 2-Minute Tuesdays, where we thought every Tuesday we would post a 2-minute video, but they weren't always on Tuesdays, and they weren't always 2 minutes. But the video is called "Writing Arguments from the Bottom Up," which means like you're starting with those 7 terminal impacts. You look at the topic and you think, which of these can link? Which of these can I connect to this topic? Which of them have the strongest connections? And then you just, once you think of that, you then look it up, try to find some evidence that validates it. Boom, you're basically done with the whole strategy of writing that argument. Now you have to write it out. This is how really good Parley teams write their arguments, for instance, because they only have 20 minutes to write debate cases that are as detailed or have more. At most NPDA rounds I've watched in open cite more evidence than public forum rounds and LD rounds that I watch. And you have months to put those cases together. But anyway, Parley kids are very good at doing this, but it applies to every format of debate, because it's not just helping you write arguments very quickly, it's helping you write arguments with very good impacts, because you're thinking of the impacts first. But here's another example of how another argument that could fit, and this is an argument that I wrote. So what is the connection between the U.S. opening borders and prison populations, right? This is like how I think about arguments. You might dislike this. I think there's some stuff to dislike about this, but I don't know. That's the effect strategy has on games, right? Is that something comes along, and that might be a fair strategy, that might be an unfair strategy. I don't think this is an unfair strategy, and I think this is a valid argument. But the point is that if you haven't thought of and accounted for that strategy, you just get wrecked. You have no idea what just happened, right? So can you, watching this video, think of how you might be able to connect open borders to prison population? And in fact, saying opening the borders will increase the prison population. Most people would be like, okay, but you're most of the resolutions, like this resolution, talks about making something illegal. That makes sense. How something being made illegal will increase the number of people in like jails and prisons. But how can making something not illegal increase it? Well, the answer is flight risk. When courts are determining whether or not to give you bail, they consider the risk that you will leave the country. Now, for the average person, the risk that they will somehow leave the country is low, because when you try to leave the country, there is a border station and they ask to see your passport, and they run your passport and it says, don't let this person leave. For some people who have like their own private jets or something like that, they might be like, nope, you don't get to do this because you have an easier time leaving the country, perhaps. But what happens when you remove the border and now no one is going to check the passports anymore? Probably more courts would deny bail, because now there is an increased chance of somebody being able to leave the country. And you don't change anything. You don't create like extradition laws by creating open borders. You don't change the bail process, right? All the affirmative does is open the borders. They don't address any of these new issues with the bail system. And I think it's pretty likely. Now, you might have to talk about jail, not prison, because jail is where, you go when you can pay bail to leave. But that just means highlighting a different part of the status quo card. And that means finding something that says, yes, it is something we take into consideration when people can leave. And not every judge is going to like this argument, right? They're going to dislike that it feels very off topic and stuff like that. But if you overcome that barrier, the judge doesn't care. Like, the impact that you can get to is a lot stronger than the impact that you would get to otherwise. And also keep in mind that in order to beat this argument, you have to respond to it. And if they don't, it's just a free win, right? I think that's my last note here before we go into the third implication. Yes, which is skills of diminishing returns in debate. So by skills, I mean all of the stuff that you do drills for, pretty much. The pen drill, or you know, research skills, or how fast you can talk, or how much you know about things, right? And this is where I want to ask you this question, right? Would you work 5 times harder at debate if it would only give you a 25% improvement in your results? I think for most people, the answer to that is no, that doesn't feel worth it. And I think for most people, it is not worth it. You can get much bigger improvements through much less work. There is a point at which you've improved so much that there's no other way to keep improving. And we'll talk about that in just a second. This is called the Pareto Principle. The Pareto Principle says that 80% of results come from 20% of effort or actions, right? So in other words, here's some examples that people give. So 80% of a company's output is from 20% of its workers, right? The other 80% of workers only really contribute to combine like 20% of the output. Or think of it this way. There's lots and lots of videos on YouTube, but most videos have 0 views, 1 view, 10 views. There's much fewer videos that have millions of views. And so on YouTube, 20% of the videos accounts for 80% of the total viewings on YouTube. There's a bunch of other examples here. Actually, one case where it's a little bit out of whack is wealth distribution. 86% of wealth is owned by 20% of people, not 80. But okay. But let's talk about how that applies to what we want to talk about. This is what I would call diminishing returns, right? If you have a B- in a class, or let's say you took a class, you got a B- and you wanted to take it again, or take a similar class, and you want to get an A+ this time, you would have to work 5 times harder in that class in order to see a 25% improvement, but it's 25% of 80, so it's 20% of the total. You hear what I'm saying? But to move up those 2-letter grades, it takes substantially more work. And this is why, by the way, if your school doesn't have like a plus minus GPA system, so like for example at the college at DVC where I taught, if you had a 100% in a class, that counted as 4 points towards your GPA. If you had a 90%, that counted as 4 points towards your GPA. We didn't have pluses and minuses. And what that meant was if you had a 90% and then you like worked really hard to move that up, all of that work was kind of worth nothing as far as your GPA goes. Maybe it has some other, I don't know, values. But another implication is that going 4.2 is 5 times easier than going 6.0. And the skills that you have to build. Now, this isn't always true in debate because people have different strategies and stuff like that, right? And there's mismatches, and it depends on the tournament and so on. But what that means essentially is that each skill in debate has a soft cap. What does that mean? What that means is you will quickly reach a point for any skill where it's giving you 80% of the results that it will ever give you. Let's, for example, talk about, I don't know, what's a thing people do drills for? Talking fast, right? Yeah, when you start learning how to talk fast, and if that works in your circuit and people allow it and whatever, you're going to win a bunch of rounds, right? But uh, at a certain point, there's diminishing returns, which means you have to work harder and harder to keep seeing any results whatsoever. It reaches a point where the amount of benefit you get versus the amount of work you put in is increasingly imbalanced. And that is true of any skill in debate. Not as much strategy, but the strategic depth of debate just isn't that much. Like, you can learn proper debate strategy in a season, right? Um, because debate strategy right now is not that in depth compared to a game like chess. And the reason it's not that in depth is because it's not a well designed game. And so certain strategies are just wildly unfair. And people, you just need to do that to keep winning. There's no like counter to it. And people just don't think of it as a strategic activity, and people also have very little time in the activity. By the time you really start to figure out what you're doing, your high school career is done. And so the strategic elements, I think, of debate uh, will yield a lot more like results in the long term than working on any specific skill set, because your skills will always have diminishing returns, and strategy doesn't really. Is this the last thing I had? Yeah, thanks. um, this is just a little bit of me talking about strategy in general. I can talk about any of these things in more detail, um, but and I want to have a whole like set of videos on specific debate strategies. But this is more just getting you thinking about debate differently, right? To not think of it as like a good debater is somebody who knows a lot of topic, like knows a lot about the topic, and then wrote a really good case and then gave their speech really well. Because a debater who does none of those things but really understands debate strategy has a huge advantage. And I hope this encourages you to look into that. Is there anything else? No? Okay. All right, folks. How long was this one? 48 minutes? Okay, yikes. All right. Bye.